So here we're going to be looking at the welfare effects of price cap, and this is from my textbook in microeconomics, and I'm Rickard Friberg. So we're going to be using the same numerical values as we do in previous graphs in this chapter. Just to be specific, would be general supply and demand functions, but it's easier, I think, to get the intuition if we're looking at a specific example. So there's a supply, inverse supply curve, 2 plus 2 times QS, supplied quantity, and then there's demand. Okay, 23 minus QD, like that. And we can draw those like this. And so we have as usual quantity on the horizontal axis, price on the vertical. We have a demand curve like this, with an intercept of 23, and then we have the supply curve sloping upwards like this with supply, demand, and intercept down here of 2. And we've seen before a previous exercise that the equilibrium quantity here is 17, and the equilibrium price is 16. Okay, so now assume that there's a price cap, a price ceiling, a highest price that firms are able to charge on the market. So there's a price cap of P equals 12. Okay, so we're going to be seeing how does that affect the market. So we can think of this as starting from a price of 12, then seeing how much is supplied, how much is demanded, and what are the welfare effects of that. Okay, so let's do that. Moving out along here, we first hit the supply curve. So how much is supplied at a price of 12? Okay, so to get that, we look at the supply curve, of course. So we plug in the 12 here for price. So we know that the quantity supplied will be solving the relation given by 12. The price equals to 2 plus 2 times QS, the quantity supplied. So we solve that for quantity supplied. So divide by 2 and shift everything over, and we'll get the quantity supplied equal to 5. Okay, so we can say supply here. Demand, how much is demanded? If price is equal to 12, how much do customers want to buy at this low price? Well, that's more. Price is below the equilibrium price, excess demand. So here, similarly, we look at the price of 12. We know that quantity demanded will be solving the following relation. So 12, the price equals to 23, the intercept of the demand function minus QD, which implies that QD equals 23 minus 12, which is 11. So 11 units will be demanded. So there's a excess demand of 6 units here. Okay, so what if we now look at the welfare effects of this? So, and as before, we look at welfare by the change in consumer surplus and producer surplus. So welfare, we look at the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus as our measure. So let's draw this up here. So we can, instead of writing all the different ones, we focus here on the, just simplify and just look at the change in consumer surplus first. So consumer surplus under a perfect competition setting is given by the area between the price and demand up until equilibrium quantity of 17. So this area, okay, that we've calculated in the previous example. Consumer surplus in the case of the price cap, still given by the demand function. So difference between demand and price evaluated now at the actual quantity of 5. Okay, so this area will be the consumer surplus, which means that the consumer surplus will be increasing by area B. So there are a number of units for which the consumers are paying less. That's good for consumer surplus. But there are a number of units that are not being consumed. Okay, so because supply diminishes. Okay, less is supplied. So the change in consumer surplus is plus B minus A. Okay, so there's some benefits. We get to purchase the good at a lower price. That's good for consumers, but there's also some goods that are not being purchased. That's bad for consumers. And in a more elaborate analysis, you can say, well, maybe the people who don't get to purchase are not the same people as those who get to purchase at a lower price, and you can do some analysis on that, try to weigh the benefits of different groups, etc. But at the most basic level, this is what's going on. We can also look at the change in producer surplus. So what happens to producer surplus? So that let's see, we've written an C here. That's not what I want. We want that to be an A, which is consistent with that, and we want this to be a C. Sorry. That's like that. So the change in producer surplus. So producer surplus, it's a difference between the price that producers are getting and what they in principle would be willing to supply for, which is the supply curve. So the difference between price and supply curve up until the actual quantity. Okay, so in the perfectly competitive, with looking at the market equilibrium, will be the area of this triangle will be the producer surplus, whereas if we're looking at the situation with the price cap, it's only this area, right? That's difference between the price that firms are getting and what they're willing to supply for. So it's a smaller triangle that represents the producer surplus, which means that the producer surplus decreases by, let's do that in red again, minus B minus C, okay? Which means that the change in welfare for netting these things out is that the B that disappears. If we're looking at the total welfare, it's just a transfer from consumers or from producers to consumers rather. So we can, we can have thoughts on that. We can weigh consumers higher than producers, but it is a transfer. It doesn't affect the overall efficiency if we so wish. Whereas we have the areas A and C, which again represent a deadweight loss. So these are cases where, in principle, there are consumers willing to pay more than what suppliers are willing to supply for. So there are gains from trade to be made, but they don't come about because of the price cap. Okay, so that's one way to illustrate the simplest welfare effects of a price cap.